Oh, good evening and welcome to the New School. My really great pleasure and privilege to be here this evening and to introduce the legendary Antony Gormley. When you have art, you have voice, and when you have voice, you have freedom. And when you have freedom, you have responsibility. And I'm quoting Richard Franklin from the Gujamari people of Melbourne. Gormley is an artist deeply engaged with responsibility that extends to profound generosity. Some small amount of years ago, Gormley arrived in Sydney to install Field for the Art Gallery of New South Wales. The work consists of 1,100 little clay figures made from the red bull dust of the centre of Australia. The figures are arranged in two hemispheres, mimicking the plan of the brain. There is a pathway down the middle to the central lobe where you stand. From this vantage point, you become aware that all the figures have eyes that are all focused directly on you, and you are the only one in this work. You are the judged and the judge. After all, one is the other. Since early in his career, Antony has sought opportunities to work with communities and to make his art about the communal body. The 1,000 plus small figures were made by local students, multiple hands performing simple actions to form the likeness of a body, but equally making a trace of their own hands. I should know, as I was one of those students. Over a period of days or weeks, or perhaps months, at a distance I don't recall a length of time, but rather the intensity of time, I sat in the basement of the Art Gallery of New South Wales, in a windowless room, forming clay figures while Antony shared stories of fish eggs laid in the bull dust during the floods, swept up in the clouds, eggs fertilized by the rain, and the fish raining from the sky. I learnt more about the country I lived in from those weeks than I had in the entire sum of my life. Making work was never quite the same again. We were illuminated as to how each figure had its own life and of our responsibility to the greater narrative. It was one of the most formative experiences of my life and has spun out over time in not only what my responsibility is with my own work, but also in the how and why of teaching. An Australian desert night sky full of starry thanks. There is a collaborative aspect to many of Gormley's works that extends to the incorporation of sight into an engagement with living culture. In Lake Ballard in West Australia, where that wind comes across all time and space, you will find Gormley's work inside Australia. Gormley's figures embedded in a lake floor, a lake that exists in a cycle of flood and drought, phase in and out of the shimmering light like ciphers for an imbricated past, present and future, of a land bruised by its colonial past, but held close to the beating heart of 100,000 years of continuous culture. Gormley's work shifts us from the singularity of the figure to a position that bears witness to a collective body. Gormley's works, installed into the sites across the world, in sum, powerfully suggest that the world is not a fixed experience, rather that it is a shapeshifter revealed through time, culture, necessity, and politics, profoundly human and insistently contemporary. Through his work, we encounter the intimate and the infinite. His works reveal our symbiotic relationship with the world where our actions and environment are entwined narratives, the unfolding eternity of being. A quote to end on by Graham Wood from Tycho's Nova. It is night. The artist sits at a desk by a window that looks out to the world, traces patterns over a reproduction of the tectonic system of the world, a pattern of emanating circles and symbols that seems to both simplify and occlude understanding, starts to cry, holding still for a while, folds away the writings, charts, and diagrams, and goes to bed. In sleep, dreams of great light, an exploding pattern that grows, shifts, swallowing stars while changing and waking into life. Antony Gormley swallows stars and in the sharing of his art with us, changes and wakes us into life. With very special thanks to White Cube and Sean Kellery and a big shout out to Anthony Curry, and presented by Parsons Fine Arts Department at Parsons School of Design with the Institute for Public Knowledge and the New York Institute for Humanities at the New York University, please join me in welcoming Sir Antony Gormley.
Simone, everybody, it's a huge honor and pleasure to be here. I've never been in this space before, And thank you, Simone, for those amazingly generous words. I've called this talk "What's Sculpture Good For?" and it suggests that I might know. But I really don't. And I guess the wonderful thing about a space like this, it's a womb, isn't it? It's an egg. And I'd love to be able to use your attention and the energy of all of us to think about that question. I think this is an amazing time. I think this is a very important place. New York is so important to me. I did my first proper gallery show here in 1984. I think of New York as a place where European modernism took root and somehow changed the nature of what art could be. And I'd like to think that today, this evening, tonight, together, we can just try to think what now, at the beginning of a new millennium, at the beginning of a new century, at a time when forces seem to be reverting, your leader and our leader, our little island, your big continent, they're going backwards, on the hope of re-achieving a greatness that is a myth. Us to the idea maybe of being the progenitors of the Industrial Revolution and having empires. You, in a way, as the machine shop, the mechanism of modernity. And yet neither of them, both of those worldviews are based on nostalgia, not about a responsible look at the future. That each and every one of us, in our own way, have to be the creators of. And it doesn't matter whether we're artists or not. The big issues that challenge our species are bigger than ever before. America was a large continent that seemed to be there for the exploiting. We now know that model doesn't work. We're reaching 10 billion. We know that this planet, in a way, we're burning it up. We're burning up the combined memory or resource battery of 4 billion years of photosynthesis. And the question that really faces every single one of us is how can our species contribute to, in a positive way, the evolution of the biosphere and take on the ideas of great thinkers, your great thinkers like E.O. Wilson, and the notion of consilience and the replacement of a Darwinian idea about natural selection, of being the survival of the fittest through random mutation, to another idea about purposeful evolution, in which all the tools of consciousness can be used. What's art got to do with all of this? Well, I think that in a time in which it's very, very clear we've lost the faith, both in religion, and in our leaders in politics, I think that art can provide an arena, an open space, a place of possibility. And I guess that's where I want to talk about sculpture. Sculpture, in a curious way, is an art form that has declared its thingness and thereby its independence from perhaps image making, from perhaps picture making, by insisting that it can be a thing in the world of things. and yet how it does it and how it transmutes. And I have to confess here that I am passionately interested in the idea of sculpture as a discrete discipline with discrete syntax, with, as it were, those three great kind of divisions of sculptural practice. The deconstructive act of carving, the additive act of modeling, the constructive act of making, welding, building structures. And in a world that has been transmuted by cyber connectivity, the narrative and image aspect of art making generally has taken over from that idea of the discreteness of, in a way, vocations in the arts. And I think there's a problem there. How did all that happen? I guess before I start showing you pictures and you go to sleep, I'd just like to think about, were there particular events that kind of at the beginning of the 20th century were a hinge? Because I think I'm looking for a hinge here, now. So 1915, general relativity. 1913, Duchamp's bicycle wheel. 1920, Joyce's Ulysses. Between the wars, the Dialectics of Enlightenment, that incredibly important chapter in it, The Culture Industry, written by Horkheimer and Adorno, that warns us about in a way, the danger of Hollywood as a subversive act of dequalifying the individual imagination. Duchamp sidestepping a whole history of our hominin evolution that is to do with making. Homo erectus, Homo habilis, sapiens sapiens, the need to form and to inform ourselves. What Nietzsche called the will to power, Panofsky called the will to form. Duchamp's proposition that rather than the old idea about sublimation, synthesis, objective skepsis being used to form and formulate a proposition is displaced by the idea that you can, rather than, as it were, working to isolate, simply isolate, take objects out of the flow of time and usage and present them as objects of contemplation. I'm going to leave that hanging. What does that mean? What does that mean for art? What does that mean for us? What does it mean for, as it were, the evolution of consciousness in time? So then, Ulysses, stream of consciousness, the idea that it is possible to, as it were, replace grand narratives, replace a Hegelian system of spirit of the times with individual consciousness as, in a way, the only source of truth in a collapse of world-seeking ideologies. So, I mean, I'm just trying to think about a previous hinge and what that gave rise to. It gave rise to, I think, an idea about the independence of art, the escape of art from the power of patronage, the right of artists to inhabit that notion of a free individual capable of declaring the conditions of their work, the subject of their work, and indeed the meaning of their work. And we have this extraordinary process that maybe starts with Impressionism and maybe ends or doesn't end with minimalism, an assertion of, in a way, style as content, the discovery of a wide range of potential formal solutions to the thing that art has to offer. Well, my contention is that this Hinge is about returning the freedoms that artists and art took for itself back to the world in order to really fulfill those things that Duchamp, in a way expressed as the viewer doing half the work, and what Ernst Gombrich called the beholder's share. The notion that the work of art is no longer inherent in a singular object of high spiritual and economic value, but in a process of co-production. And that somehow the uprising of art is no longer held within what Adorno called the culture industry. And I think it's a strange time of the world with the proliferation of the art fair, the proliferation of biennales and private galleries, that actually what is happening very, very evidently, that there is a drift of consciousness towards the space of art as a space of becoming, as a space of possibility, as a space of transformation, which curiously seems to be completely independent of all of the forces of commodification and specialization that both institution and commerce offers. Anyway, sorry, those were rather general. Excuse me. I get passionate about things and then I don't know where to stop. So let's look at real sculpture. So this is the heel stone in Stennes. So how many of you have been to Orkney? 1.5, 2. Anyway, there are a few islands in the north of Scotland where our early farmers settled. They were relatively treeless in those days, but the Gulf Stream made them warm. And there's something, I think, really, this watchstone that stands at the isthmus of two bands of water before the stone of Stennes. What is it? It's something that was lying. It's a naturally formed stone that has been stood up by an act of will. It becomes a marker in space, but demands, in a way, our time. It confronts us with a gesture that was, in a way, collective, because to raise it must have been a communicated collective desire. And it transforms a space that is a result of geology and fauna and flora into a marked space, and therefore into a place, and therefore into an invitation of dwelling. And so this dialectic, you could say. I'm very keen on collapsing dialectics, but the dialectic between a thing and a place is something that I think sculpture might be good at collapsing or catalyzing. Silbury Hill, Salisbury Plain, flat. This is a man-made mountain. You might think, well, it must be burial. It's not. Again, made by the early farmers about the same time as Stonehenge, so about 2000 BC, same as the Watchstone. A place to climb, a place to get closer to the sky in an otherwise completely flat environment. A place that, in a way, invites physical activity, invites you to reposition your body in relation to space and, to a degree, to time, but again, marks this otherwise undifferentiated plain. Salisbury Plain is a big plain. Our armies use it to play around with dangerous toys. But our ancestors used it as a place to honor continuity. Continuity between mind and matter, and continuity between the living and the dead. So, Jetna Vanaramaya, this is the second largest sculptural object, or is it a building? Well, no, it isn't a building because you can't go inside. It's made of 93.3 million bricks. It's solid. You might think again, well, maybe it's a burial ground. Silbury Hill wasn't made to bury. My old archaeology professor did a dig there, and they found nothing apart from matted willow staves that were used to stabilize the earth as they put it down. This is a stupa made, this is in Sri Lanka, about 300 before the Common Era, so 300 BC. And again, this is it's 122 meters high. It's a way of saying, here is a place to think about our connection with space at large, our connection with the planet. And like all planetary bodies, we're invited to orbit around it. And here is somebody walking. As if you go to Bodh Gaya or you go to Svayambhunath, you're invited to rotate, to process around the sacred stupas. So I guess this is my proposal, that sculpture is a marker in space that calls upon our time, and calls upon our time bodily, because we are embodied minds, and in some way to think completely, I think we need to engage the whole body, and I think that's something that sculpture is very good at. And here is me. This isn't a great work, but it's one that I finished last week, and I thought I'd just show it to you. And the thing that I'm pleased about is this, that these are different views of the same object. Oh, you might find it difficult to reconcile them. So here again is a thing that is also a place that has an edge but doesn't enclose anything, unlike those other earlier objects. but it sort of encourages you to walk around it, to resolve these differences. And maybe in reasserting, you could say, the archaic position of the statue, but leaving aside representation, idealization, heroism, nudity, narrative, that it just sort of tries to say, well, here is a human space in space that somehow is articulated by the language of the habitat that bodies have found in our species necessary to support themselves. And I guess what I'm thinking is that this then becomes a ground too. It's a ground for co-production. There is no, as it were, symbolic or metaphoric process here or wish, but there is an invitation to kind of project, to occupy this frame, to activate this web. And I guess that, I just wanted to show you a few early. This is out of focus because it is out of focus, because I took it, this is me at art school. I come back from India for a year. Somebody gave me a boat. I was in Pelion, somewhere in northern Greece, picked up some sticks and stuck them in the cave. I think, like the Standing Stone, there's one thing that sculpture is good for is that you can take something from over here and put it over here, and that displacement of material causes something to happen. And I'm not making great claims for this, but it's just an interesting fact of what it does in terms of our relationship. I mean, I wish you could be there with me in the little boat, bobbing about, looking at this, not particularly interesting or particularly deep cave, but what happens as a result of these repeated verticals, and what it does in terms of articulating the volume and making you think about what is apparent and what is hidden, what is visible and what is suggested, and maybe begins to articulate the mass of the stone in a way that without the sticks it wouldn't be. And then the idea that maybe within, and I guess I'm talking now about discreteness, the discreteness of sculpture, thinking physically with the affordance that a particular material gives you. So this is another thing that I did while I was at art school, which was just taking a slice of a big old cedar tree and trying to find the first year of growth in the center of it. The revelation, in a way, of time and the history of the object, and turning something that was already made, in a sense that it had been cut out of a block, like a block of stone cut out of a mountain, but then seeing within it something to do with place again. So collapsing object place distinction and saying an object can be a place. And then at a certain point thinking, can I translate some of those sort of thoughts to human life itself? And if you like, with the trunk of the tree, I'm going from the bark to this, real life sapling, or the core, the base of the sapling at the base of the trunk. And here I am. It's a very strange experience coming back, having been away from, in a way, my own culture, my own home, my own family for 3 years, and then wearing these clothes, which were the last clothes that were bought for me at university by my parents, that suggested a certain identity, suggested a certain, in a way, persona. Putting them on that these aren't the clothes that I chose to wear as an art student, but I put them on and then made this, which is essentially leaving them all in their object relations, making an enclosure up to my own height, but expanding it into an arena. Expanding it. I mean, if clothes are an interface between, as it were, selfhood and the world, I guess I wanted to open that space up and make it into an arena of projection. So all of these things on the floor this was a very good pair of shoes that I inherited from my father, a pair of Church Brothers. How many of you got Church Brothers shoes? At least one. We're doing quite well tonight. But anyway, the point was really to deconstruct that notion of a given identity, think about selfhood, see if there was a way of, again, we live in an object that's called a body, but we cannot be defined by our appearance. Bodies contain minds that are capable of infinite extension, and I guess I just wanted to make a piece that, again, maybe denied its objecthood in order to re-establish its placeness and to share the particular with, as it were, the collective. And early on, I'm sorry, I'm looking at these early things because I think they're at the root of my project, whatever that may be. And I suppose doing it in relation to an understanding about certainly Occidental sculpture in the West. I mean, the history of Michelangelo, of Bernini, of Giacometti even, but trying to do something different. So here is a sarsen stone brought over at the end of the last ice age, so whatever, 11,000 years ago, deposited near Ditchling in southern Britain. And thinking, is it possible to talk about a human place in relation to a naturally made object? So this is a glacial erratica. And can I, with a minimum translation of that boulder, talk about our need for, you could say, the support of material, our sense of touch, our relationship to matter. So this is simply, this is not the same stone as I showed you the picture of, but it's made in the same way. My wife drew a chalk line around my silhouette, and then I carved that line to a point where there was the beginning of relief, but that didn't destroy the authentic nature of, in a way, that geological work that had been done by the ice and by time. Anyway, it just suggests another attitude to transformation or displacement that sculpture is good for, where it's not about an image, it's about a trace, a kind of physical memory. And I've done similar things in different ways all over the place. So this is what was mentioned in the introduction, the clay that became the field for the Art Gallery of New South Wales was the clay we dug out to make the foundation for this work, which is called A Room for the Great Australian Desert. It's in an undisclosed location to the west of Broken Hill in, on the edge of southern Australia. And I guess this was the next step on from the clothes. This is saying, can we, if clothes are an interface between, as it were, a subject and a kind of outer world, maybe beyond the clothes we have rooms and cities, and that maybe we can make a human space in space that uses the language of modernity, of architecture, in order to rethink our place within a wider world. So this was specially chosen as a location in which there was an absolutely flat 360 degree horizon. You're not intended to go there, but the piece is there. It is, I think, just asking a question about where the human project fits, as it were, in planetary terms. At a certain point, it became important to me to work directly with the body, but not in a way that was about, again, narrative or idealization, but simply about capturing a moment of lived time and doing it in the same way as that carved outline on the stone, providing a place that could then become a receptacle of projected empathic sense from others. And the way that was made was to start with a mold. This is a rather dramatic photograph, but this is how the solid iron forms that replaced the hollow earlier lead body case works replace that void space with solid. And then what do you do with it? Well, I think that you try to find a place where it's going to somehow disorientate the daily kind of flow of a city or a beach or a mountain. And this was the last project that I did 10 years ago here in this city. And again, this is like that first work that I showed, which is the last work that I've made, but this is now 20 years ago, these pieces that I think of, they're industrial fossils, a way of, in a way, displacing space with a memory of a human body. And it's not the intrinsic nature of the object, but what it does on the street and on the skyline, and how that confrontation works. And I guess what it means when somebody asks that question, what is this thing doing in my world? And the way that the implicitly the object returns that question to the one who asks it and says, well, what are you doing here? And the degree to which those confrontations can often be extremely disturbing or magical in a sense. Because what are these? I think they're a repossession. For me, they're a kind of repossession of the idea of birth, of being, but within, you could say, a mature, adult, grown body, to the point where, you know, this encounter is really one of an uncanny nature. What is this object, and what is it doing in my world, has a kind of catalytic effect on the life of the street, and turns, as it were, the everyday into a representation of itself, or anyway, opens it up to reflexivity. There are lots of ways in which I've tried then increasingly, as the introduction suggested, to involve more and more direct participation. So this is a more recent work called Passage. It's a tunnel made in human form, in which there is the invitation to enter. Some people don't get very far. You're walking into your own shadow. It's into darkness. It's acoustically very, very alive. You feel your own breathing. You are very aware of your footfall fall down this resonating chamber. You can see a flickering light at the end, which is the reflection of the entranceway, but it is, in a sense, blocked by your own body. When you get to the end, if you get to the end and you turn round, you then are returned to the light, to the world. So that idea of perhaps sculpture being an opportunity to start again, to review, reflect, and return, to look again at the world in a sense as an image that can be read, that isn't one that is redolent of duty. I've extended that then to a wider kind of interpretation or interest in thinking about the spaces that we make to enclose ourselves. And if if Piero della Francesca kind of or Mantegna realized that you could evoke three dimensions by the use of single point perspective in two dimensions, I was very interested in using, in a way, the language of perspective to then destroy perspective and invite a kind of participation. And this is breathing room. So this is about 1/8 of the total volume of a space. This is a space in Paris, which is then repeated 7 times, and each time stretched in a different axis. These frames are made with photoluminescent paint and soak up daylight during the day, and then become emitters of light during the night. And you're invited to enter, pass through this 3-dimensional mandala, and it becomes then a kind of instrument by which the viewer becomes the viewed, by which space is articulated by the time of the individuals that pass through it. And I think this has brought me to, a new kind of zone of inquiry into how sculpture might interact with space, or not occupy it, but activate it. And here is a recent work from Royal Academy show, which is 21 architectural volumes that form a cloud that hangs about 2 meters from the ground, that I think encourages the same kind of reflexivity. If in a way, this is like the revealed skeleton of our built environment, the rebar that lies in the inner kind of structural grid of most of the buildings that we live in now in our inner cities, released from function, and becomes this sort of cloud, a matrix that is very difficult to focus on, but kind of invites a very different form of mobility and behavior. And similarly, here are other recently made bodies that use the language of architecture to identify a human space in space that could equally well be a model of a building as a evocation of a bodily position on the floor. And it involves a kind of, I mean, this is like going into a builder's yard and seeing potential material displayed and arranged in different formations that invites interpretation, invites projection, invites that beholders share. And there was something about both of these rooms, both this and this, that slowed people down. We avoided wall text. We avoided anything that in some way made these into symbolic or emblematic things. They were, if you like, displaced material, familiar materials, materials that in some way we associate with industry and manufacture and engineering. But now I would like to say redeployed as grounds for feeling, for thinking, for reinterpreting our environment and our situation. I'm just going to end with two other relatively recent projects. This is Horizon Field, Hamburg, where another form of displaced material and familiar structures of trusses and horizontal planes were used to make a place of transformation, a place of transmission. So this is you could say a monochrome painting that is 50 meters long by 25 meters wide and hangs on 8 half-inch diameter wires from the ceiling of the Deichselhallen in Hamburg. It's about 22 feet from the ground. There's a staircase for going up and a staircase for coming down. It can swing at about 4 or 5 hertz. It can move up to about 6 foot in any direction. And 100 people at a time are invited to occupy it. It's a large monochrome, 6 tons of black epoxy paint on a very thin membrane. As you can see from this photograph, people were invited to go up, but they were invited to take their shoes and socks off. Some didn't take their socks off, but everybody took their shoes off. And we suggested that people didn't need their mobile phones, so they left them behind. And you step out, if you see on the top right-hand corner of this image, you'll see there's a bridge at the top of the staircase that you walk across and then step onto this lightly moving platform. The platform is taut as a drum. It's between 1/3 and 1/2 an inch thick, half of which is made of this epoxy paint and the other half of very thin plywood. It's a membrane through which you feel every other person's motion on this platform. And it could be conceived that this is a kind of model of democracy. The individual can move the group can move the individual. You are very, very aware through transmitted vibration of that membrane of the total energy field of the field itself. And any one person, if you move and then stop, will start this oscillation. And at the point where 2 or 3 people copy each other and walk forward 3 steps, stop, and then walk back 3 steps, you can start the whole platform moving. At that point, everybody sits down because it's quite difficult to stay standing. Anyway, I'll just show you this slightly corny time lapse, but it'll give you an idea of how this thing was made. This, rather like the clearing that I made on Pier 3 of Brooklyn Bridge Park, was made entirely in the space, as was Matrix at the Royal Academy.
Sicherheitsexperten
So,
und Experten aus den Bereichen Stahlbau, Holz.
this was the painting part. This, again, like so many now of my projects, was the result of, this is where you can see the whole platform is moving very gently. It's basically a monochrome surface, but also a mirror surface. So you see yourself reflected. There's a sense in which it's a complete reversal of how the treasure house model of the museum has been inverted. I removed, you can see there are roof lights all the way around this space. I removed the bottom section, the obscured glass, and placed clear glass, so that from this altitude at the center of Hamburg, people could look out and see, as it were, the city from which they had come. And there's a sense in which, again, as with the displaced body forms or the sticks in the cave, I'm simply trying to allow you to look at what's already there from the point of estrangement or from a point of distance provided by the work. I just wanted to say something about the collective engendering of these works. I now work with a number of people in 2 places, and we're making quite complex now mappings of human spaces in space that are like clearing made here, open, porous, and really technically quite tricky. The foundry that I used for 20 years went bankrupt. We took it over, and we're now making our work. I mean, it was a wonderful thing where we were able to marry 7 of the people that had been there all their lives with 7 young artists, and we now are evolving in a way the collective intelligence of an inherited industry towards new forms. We work in lost foam. We look at the work that we're making together and try to understand it, try to listen to what it is telling us. And some of the techniques and forms that we evolve, we then return to more collective forms of generation. So this is the main field made in about 15 years ago in Gateshead, next to Newcastle on the Tyne. This is the 5th floor of the Baltic Art Centre, a really large and beautiful space. 287 local people came in and offered their bodies as in a way, generative instruments for this piece. They were molded in two halves, head and arms, and then body, and rendered into three-dimensional drawings via molds that were reassembled, cut in half, welded inside. We turned again that art gallery into a production space. So this was over 3 months. People were coming in, being molded. The molds were put together, cut in half, then used to weld together the domains, and then we made this, as it were, evocation of the collective body. And what was really extraordinary was not only was this, as it were, kind of energy field of the people of the Northeast, but then what happened when people came, particularly those that had been molded, to find themselves. And of course, many of them couldn't find themselves. They didn't have, as it were, the mirror image that they were expecting. But their nearest and dearest could find them, and find them very quickly. And I guess that's another collapse that I'm interested in. That in a sense, yes, we all live at the other side of appearance, and in that wish to, as it were, reassert the realization of being again as a mature and in a way speculative intelligence, we can somehow use the space, the space of art as a generative space. And anyway, this project was one in which I just had to give people very, very simple instructions, like keep your feet completely parallel, in order for them not to be self-conscious, and in order not to kind of strike poses as we do when we're taking a selfie or having our portraits taken by others. And what's interesting, this attitude, the attitude which you could see maybe in that lady who was sitting, being molded, is sort of one of acceptance. And it's the feet are apart, the arms are like this, and it's almost like those moments in the kind of science fiction where you're being beamed up. And this separation of the body from, as it were, the way that we want to present ourselves, or from stories that we want to tell, to something else, which is to do with a set of the body that isn't to do with defined action, but to do with, in a way, the body language that happens through time and through our experience, that has nothing, in a way, nothing to do with idealization and nothing to do with taking up a position, but something to do with acceptance. And I just wanted to show you the project that was mentioned at the beginning inside Australia, where I kind of started in a plane just looking for somewhere where perhaps this evocation of the self could take another place. And I worked with the local community. Instead of being molded, I got a scanner from Los Angeles to come to Menzies, this small town in Western Australia. We scanned people and then reduced them by 2/3. So what you end up with is this I call them insiders. They're a kind of bodily core that, as it were, ignores the accidents of appearance in order to capture that internal attitude and then expose them in space. So this is Salt Lake, Lake Ballard, a few, maybe 150 miles north and west of Kalgoorlie. And this is where those works went. This was 51 sculptures equally divided between indigenous people and white folk, placed on about 24 square kilometers of salt, where these highly etiolated body forms are separated by between 75 and 250 meters and shimmer on the horizon that is often mirage-filled, and where you carry, as it were, the relationship between a man and a woman, a child and a parent. And it's your journey across this isolated, flat, monochrome surface, a taut, saline surface that again is like the skin of a drum, and leave behind on that surface the memory of your journey. Sorry, I just wanted to find that image where, because of the nature of this is a huge salt lake that only floods once a year at the most. But you break through the crust, you leave, as it were, this track of your own, a trace, like the trace of the outline of my body, a trace across this surface. And I suppose for me, this is a celebration of art now taken back to an act of healing, allowing the first Australians to be in repossession of their dream time, made with them in a zone of massive exploitation. This is very close to the super pit in Kalgoorlie, one of the largest gold mines in the world. And I guess, in the end, I think that's what I wanted to end with. Duchamp thought that you could, by using the exclusive nature of the institution of the vitrine, somehow remove things from the flow of time and use and allow them to become points of reflection on, you could say, our process, our evolution, our developing intelligence. And I sort of feel like the flow should be going the other way. We can internalize nature, which is a room in the recent show at the Royal Academy called Host, where I mixed 25 tons of Buckinghamshire with 30,000 litres of the Atlantic. Anyway, the outside brought inside as it were, the basic elements reformulated by, as it were, the frame of culture. Or by making, we could say, cultural production somehow take its place in the elements. And that's what I've done here. By evolving a work called Feeling Material, the space of the human seen as a transformative space of energy, at first enclosed within architecture, released from the body, made into a place of engagement and exploration, and now, for the first time, here in New York, placed in relation to Wall Street, to Lower Manhattan, to this long-standing social experiment of high-density, high-rise living. And I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what this is going to be used for. But what I like is, this is in a way an expression of the energy of the people that made it. There were 25 of us. We made it over 2.5 weeks. I was only there for the last 4 or 5 days. It was fantastic. We shared somewhat a common language, but the thing that we really shared was the material and learning what it had to tell us. It's a strange structure. It isn't an object, it is more of a place, but it's also a drawing. It's a drawing made out of 18 kilometers of material that wants to be straight, and we made it bend. And that it has this extraordinary, again, a kind of tension between restraint. This is a material that's been coiled into springs, but at the same time is completely open and seems to express a kind of freedom, a joie de vivre. On the one level, it's like a nest. It invites you to go in there and explore it and its insides. But at the same time, it's like a trap. For me, this has been a huge adventure, a huge privilege. I couldn't have made it alone. This is another one of the great things that sculpture does, that it allows us to work together through material and communicate through material. And I guess what I want this to be now is an expression of the implicit energy of this extraordinary place, this extraordinary city. Walking under the Brooklyn Bridge last night, walking under the Manhattan Railway Bridge, and hearing that incredible rattling noise, and thinking of this as, in a sense, another acoustic equivalent of the combined energy of this amazing city. And I guess here seeing this under the changing light of the sky yesterday it was sunny, today it was raining, but always in the face of Wall Street, of this architectural colossus, so different maybe from that stupa that I showed you in Anuradhapura in Sri Lanka, devoted somehow to exchange, to the service of late capitalism. But nevertheless, with its windows looking out over the East River, and now to this, in a way, matrix, this wild drawing, this chaotic thing that is somehow an evocation of our potential energy. And I hope that it is of some use in terms of being a contemporary agora in which personal truth, what do I feel like? What does this make me feel? How does it make my body move? Does it allow a certain choreography that invites me to use my body as a sensing mechanism that returns me maybe to those days of our ancestors when we were familiar with starlight, we were familiar with the smells that came on the wind. I know this is sounding Rousseauian and romantic, but I'm aware in a cyber society, in a time where we are being absorbed by our screens, that potential to use our bodies as sensing mechanisms, to feel our passage in space-time, and to somehow manage to use the space of art as a generative space of reflexivity, but also creativity. well, that's a gift. I hope it's a gift shared. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you. I'm very happy. Sorry, that was a bit of an old-fashioned lecture, because I think that people don't do that anymore, talk to slides and kind of veer off the straight and narrow. I think the trajectory there was somehow personal experience to collective experience, the idea of, in a way, art being an incredibly powerful potential place in which somehow collective creativity can be relocated. Anyway, any questions? Gratefully received and hopefully intelligently answered.
And just to let you know, there's 2 mics in the front, so just make your way up to one of the mics and ask your question.
No questions? Can we all go home?
Thank you. So when did you come to, if you come from United Kingdom?
I came 4 days ago.
Oh, so you came here 4 days ago, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Good to know. Thank you.
Is that all you needed to know? Three of my dearest colleagues came on the 17th and started work on this immediately. Oh. So this wasn't made in 4 days. I wish we could have made it in 4 days, but that wasn't possible.
All right.
Well, that was an easy question. Somebody have a hard question.
Hi, I wanted to ask in relation to the shift from individual to communal ideals in your art, how the newest piece in Brooklyn Bridge, how that came about as a collective between the South Korean artist BTS, from what I've heard, how that collaboration came about.
Well, no, it was quite remarkable. Sometime in November, I was contacted by Dae-young Lee, who was the curator of the Korean pavilion at the Venice Biennale, asking if I would like to be part of this global project called Connect BTS, which was going to happen in 5 capital cities. In Berlin, Buenos Aires, London, Seoul, and New York, with artists that I admire, like Anna Veronica Janssens and Thomas Saraceno. And I leapt at the chance, I have to say. And immediately I said, let's try to do something that I've never done before, which is make a clearing, but without a building. Separate this idea of, in some way, contesting the Euclidean geometry of most modernist architecture with something that is, in a sense, non-structural, and that's how it came about. And then we had to try and see whether we could do it. And I did try making a few rings and seeing whether we could make, as it were, these enough stable structure to then be able to have this single line doing high energy connectivity in the piece as a whole.
In some of the previous pictures, there were people going through the rings. Will that be an interactive part of the Brooklyn Bridge one as well? Yeah,
no, it's very important to me that people move through it. I think without that experience of, there are light tunnels and there are wormholes in that you have to kind of duck and dive. You have to move in a way that maybe we've lost familiarity with. So you have to step over things and then watch out that you don't hit your head as you come across another trajectory that is slicing through space the whole time. And I think I guess that, you know, as with Breathing Room, I wanted this space to be a kind of instrument that allows the viewer to become the viewed for other artists. I mean, for other viewers, so that you might approach the sculpture and then see that there are people in it, and the way that they are moving, in a way, communicates to you non-verbally in terms of your own muscle memory, your own remembrance of how it feels, how your body feels in certain positions. So I think of it. I think, you know, it's a what is it? It's on one level, it's a way in which the changing conditions of the atmosphere and the sky are transmitted into a kind of feeling zone for us. But at the same time, I think it's also a kind of it's a dance floor. It's an open labyrinth that you can explore, not by being hidden, but by being visible.
Thank you.
Okay.
My question is very directly related to what you just said. I'm just curious as to how you're basically, like, you said that you value the interaction between the audience and your pieces, and I'm just curious as to how that started, or what inspired you to begin that in your pieces and in your career overall.
I think, you know, broadly speaking, I think that a lot of the art of our time, or certainly, it's maybe less true now, but when I was growing up as a little artist, as a baby artist at art school, much of the art that was being made was about other art. I mean, in other words, took its validation from other art. And I felt that that was a kind of, well, it was a sad business, because it wasn't, as it were, testing art out in the world. And right from the very beginning, and maybe when I was a child it was more like this, I would make something and as it were, leave it out in the pathway of my parents. So they would have to literally stumble over it in order to get a reaction, in order to feel that somehow I had some agency in the world. And I guess, you know, when I was growing up, it was, you waited for the blessing of the gallery, you waited for the British Council or for the Art Fund to come and tell you that what you'd made was somehow valid. And I always thought that was like, well, didn't we achieve the freedom of being artists, you know, not to have to apply to our parents for their approval? And so, you know, very early on, you know, what I was trying to do was put the work on the beach, in the mountain, on the street, and just see what happens. And it's exactly the same with this. I mean, we don't know, you know, we had a celebration. Dayung and Thomas were there, who were sitting in the front here, who is the curator of the overall show and the commissioner of this show. And I said, look, you know, we're celebrating the opening of this as if this is the finished piece. Well, it isn't. It's just, we're just beginning. I think we're just beginning. We're just beginning to see, as it were, how people might use this, whatever it is, invitation, object, phenomena. So, yeah, I mean, I think from the very beginning, I wanted to test art out in the real world. And I think that the wonderful thing, that's why I like sculpture so much, because it doesn't need, I mean, it doesn't need a label, it doesn't need a wall, it doesn't need a roof, it can just be, well, we're hoping that this will survive freezing rain and whatever you can throw at it. But I think that the potential of sculpture I make things that take a few seconds to go from the weakest material, polystyrene foam, into iron. And most of those things, like those industrial fossils of my body, will last 1,000 years. And they're pretty resilient. And I think that's a fantastic thing that sculpture can do. And I guess that's what I was trying to do with Event Horizon, putting the bodies on the street here, the last project I did in New York. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
In a way, you have answered this already, but I think there's more to be said. I was going to inquire about the size of your pieces and what comes first, the art, the space, or the movement that you want people to have with the art, the interaction? And have you ever done one where you took your sculpture from a very large area and put it in a very small area to see the different reaction people would have with it, of it?
Yeah, I think there's two questions there, and one is about scale, and the other is in a way, the degree to which you look at sight. And I would say, I always look at sight first. So the Royal Academy show, even though it contained work from 40 years of thinking about sculpture, I chose the works in relation to the spaces very, very carefully. And I guess the something like this was entirely in relation to what is left of the old pier, Pier 3, and the original cast concrete, thick cast concrete surface of that, which was really important, because had this had to have its own base, it would conventionalize it entirely. So that idea of this being like a tumbleweed that's just been blown into, as it were, and sits lightly in the world is still very, very much kind of in relation to the givens. What affordance does this space offer? So I think I always think very carefully. I mean, the Royal Academy show took 4 years to evolve, 2 years to prepare the building for. Anyway, it's always a dialogue with a location. Then the thing about scale, I think scale is incredibly important. I want all of the work to recognize human scale. I mean, that is, as it were, our band, between quantum kind of truth and the subatomic and, as it were, cosmic truth of the macro world. We have this very, very thin band, as it were, of our sensorium, our kind of perceptual band. And I think everything we have to work with that. And so I do play games with scale. So in the Royal Academy show, for instance, there's a work called Cave, which is a highly geometric body, but nevertheless a body that is forced into one of the main salon rooms in order for you to feel your own relative body scale. And then in the courtyard there was a baby, 6-day-old, my daughter Paloma, that was again playing a game with scale in that large courtyard of the Royal Academy with its learned societies, putting this tiny thing in a space that has traditionally been used for grandstanding. So, Kiefer's towers or Anish Kapoor's shiny balls or Ai Weiwei's massive trees. I wanted to use scale to catalyze you as it were, perceiving instrument in this perceptual band.
Okay,
Thanks.
So I kind of have a three-part question.
Yeah.
First is, how did you get the resources to make your work in the early years after graduating from art school? Secondly, what was your early career like, the first 5 to 10 years after graduation? And thirdly, the piece that's in Australia with the 360-degree flat landscape, did you get permission to do that? Was that commissioned, or did you just do it?
I like these survival questions because it's almost like, they don't teach you that at art school, and it should be sort of in the first week of your induction. You will not have a job, you will not have money, you will not have anywhere to live. You're going to find life very tough. But somehow, one way or another, we survived, don't we? I don't know. I guess I was teaching. I think for the first really 10 years of my whatever. I'm not a career artist. I don't have a career. I have a vocation. And I guess I think I was lucky. I showed at the Venice Biennale in 1982. I was given a show at the Whitechapel in 1981. But I didn't sell any work. I didn't live by my work. I sold some work that first show here in New York in 1984. But it was teaching that prepared. I mean, that supported me. And we had our first child in 1981. Second child in 1984. And it was quite tough, but I mean, I guess being an artist, you have to be an opportunist, and this was me responding to an opportunity. Dying said, "Well, we've got this young, K-pop band that wants to spread the love, to the periphery, wants in a way to make an expression of." Maybe the potential creativity that exists everywhere, irrespective of, in a way, nation or language group, etc. And I immediately responded to that. And I think that a lot of it, when you ask how did I pay for making those early cast body forms? Well, I didn't. It was absolutely extraordinary. So the city of Vienna, for example, paid for Critical Mass, the first large work with 60 cast body forms in it. I think that you have to be hungry. You have to keep looking at whatever opportunities are around. We had, in those early days, in the 70s, we had a publication called the Artist Newsletter, and it told you about grants and residencies and all of that. And when I look out now, I think that there's a lot more opportunity now for connecting to, as it were, a kind of a network of opportunities, and you've got to be really. We didn't have the internet then. I mean, what you can learn about what's happening globally in terms of creative, opportunities is fantastic. So I think keep your eyes to the ground, or keep your ears to the web. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions?
I guess it's the same sort of question, but if you were to give any advice to a graduating BFA fine arts student?
There's only one advice, which is keep going. And how do you keep going? Well, you listen to the last work that you made and you do what it tells you. But you listen to it properly and you make it your master. All of the work you do is, in a sense, a question, and it is the mother of the next question. And if you're a real artist, you don't have any choice. You have got to just take what you've done extremely seriously and do what it tells you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So I've come to understand your work in terms of the distortion of a body as a way of reframing our perception of our body, and you assuming your own form is a way of internalizing the fact that it's an individual exploration of what it is to inhabit a body, to explore space-time, or to even inhabit dream-time, as you say, about Aboriginal people. And as we move towards a more technological and industrial society, are we in fact moving away from dream-time, or are we moving towards a new form of dream-time? And if so, how does your work relate to that? And is this move away from your own form an exploration of that?
Very, very good. This is good. You should carry on. I mean, all of these questions are extremely relevant. I mean, I see, you know, when I get out my own mobile phone and it tells me that I've just spent 4 hours, 35 minutes in the last 24 hours on my screen, I say, what, how is this possible? But it is possible, and it's been so quick, it's been like that. The ingestion, our acceptance of, as it were, these consciousness extension or whatever, I mean, the history of the world in our pocket, the kind of combined potential connectivity that we're never going to be able to use. I mean, it is a form of unachievable promise, that promise of universal connectivity. And it is, I think your intuition that this is a cyber dream time, the promise of infinite extension. My absolute passion about sculpture as a discrete discipline is that it reinforces first-hand experience. It is saying, here is a thing, here is a material proposition that invites you to walk around it, to inquire into it, to touch it, to feel it, to listen to it. And I see that as a resistance to the enchantment of the virtual. But if Leonardo had been alive now, he would have used Rhino. He would be using, you know, parametric design software. There's no question. We have to use the technology at the extended arm of our technology to its absolute capability. But I would say, I want to use that to reinforce first-hand experience every time. And that's why it's so important to me to as it were, going back to the Adorno thing, you know, to abstract the art from the institutional framework and put it back, as it were, into the elemental world, to offer back, if you like, sidereal time, the time of tides, the work of humankind and our extended arms and machinery, in order, in a way, to ask those very questions. And when we think about our ancestors and their relationship to space-time, the fact they didn't have electric light, they didn't have, as it were, these eggs of interchange, sheltered from the elements. They lived with starlight, with the changing seasons, with an ability, you know, however popular that book, Sapiens, was, what Hariri does in Sapiens is reassert. And again, of course, there's the trap of the Rousseauian kind of romantic attitude to the noble savage. But the fact is that the hunter-gatherer is, in terms of his skill base, so much wider than us. The time of specialization, the time of, in a way, the adventure of discovery has been dispersed into such nanoparticles of knowledge that when you look back and think about how alive those people had to be in order to stay alive, I mean alive to every nuance of insect travel, to change in temperature to the the fixed stars and the comets, the degree to which we were, in order to live, sensate to the moving ice sheets, to the subtle variations of season. My feeling is that art is a tool of survival. It's been there with language from the very beginning. It is still absolutely essential for us to transition to whatever that next step is. Kurzweil, or Demis Hassibis, or even James Lovelock would like us to feel that we are, in a way, the natural extension of evolution, and that we will be the progenitors of cyborgs, and that we will probably lose all but 1 billion of our species, and they will be kept as, in a way, the nipple greasers of the robots that will rule the world and provide us with a moral compass. But I think that's a very, very bleak prognosis. However, I would like to. I would like to feel that the physical skepticism of sculpture, which is what it's become, it's the shift from it serving the status quo and reinforcing systems of power to being the objective questioning of our conditions, which is what I feel this is, and therefore as a tool for the necessary changes in consciousness that have to happen if we're not to burn up with our planet. Sorry, it's all getting very apocalyptic, but another question.
Hi. First of all, I just wanted to say a huge thank you for coming here. My parents are from the UK, and they're very big fans, so your work's had a presence in my life for a very long time, and you were one of the first artists that I ever actually felt able to engage with, just because it's accessible and it is about interconnectivity, and it just really means a lot to actually see you in person sharing your thoughts, so I want to say thank you. My question is actually very similar to the last one in that it's about phones mostly and how they're changing the way that we interact with art, especially installation art. There's sort of a trend happening you see with a lot of pieces like this, or pieces that bring a lot of people together in a physical space, but people utilize social networking and Instagram and their phones as a way of documenting those experiences to the point that the use of the phone might actually subsume the experience itself. And there's this, sort of debate I'm constantly having with myself about whether this is hurting art or whether it's helping people to engage with it in a new way, helping people who might not have engaged with it in the first place. And I'm curious, what your thoughts are on the role of mobile phones and how we experience art, and maybe what your hopes or what you don't hope might happen with this installation as far as people documenting it digitally or using their phones as the
I think you've just got to you've got to make an absolutely clear distinction between, as it were, the fact, the material fact of something, the experience of something, and its media extension and its promotion or whatever. And I think there is a lot of confusion about that. And it's a curious thing. I mean, it's a truism to say, you go to an art gallery these days and people are spending more time, taking selfies of themselves with the Mona Lisa or with, than they are looking at it. And I think that that's a very fundamental confusion. The idea that every encounter, and it doesn't matter whether it's with a person or a building, a place, a landscape, you cannot replace dwelling, having a conversation, spending time looking, which is what in the old days, drawing did that so well. You know, if you think of those early explorers, all of those, you know, whether it's James Cook or kind of the first sort of explorers of the rainforest, sitting down for a day to just really get to know this foreign landscape, this thing that had flora and fauna that were unfamiliar. And you can't replace that with a photograph that takes a second. So, you know, we are burdened creatures in terms of the amount of information that we're capable of carrying, or that we're encouraged to carry, about which we can do very little. The challenge, I think, for all of us is to make an internal model that has value. And that value can only happen through dwelling and through communication and through connection. Connection can only happen through time. And it can't be replaced by Instagram. And I think that's the battle of our time. We are in contact with a lot, but we don't necessarily communicate with that contact. And I think that art should be a resistance to it. And I don't think. I mean, I did make a virtual reality work, but it's not the same as sculpture.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, we're doing a back and forth. Good, it's your turn.
I wanted to say thank you for your insights and talking about the importance of interacting with your pieces. Instead of a question, I wanted to share an experience me and my boyfriend, who's in the audience back there, had with one of your sculptures without ever having been there. About 10 years ago, or maybe even more, you had your sculptures up in the Austrian and Swiss mountains. And somehow my dad found a way to get to one of those. I know they were quite out of the way, but he managed to get up to one, and he took 2 photos. And he sent one of them to me and one of them to my boyfriend. Mine was, you know, he was standing next to your sculpture in the clothes he was hiking up to your sculpture with. And my boyfriend had a quite different reaction to the photo that he received. My dad sent him a photo where he was naked next to your sculpture. He has been
in the snow, I hope.
No, there was no snow at that point.
Snow. Okay.
Well, my dad introduced us to your work. Thank you, Dad, I guess. My boyfriend's forever traumatized, but I have the photo, and I think it would be really great with your slideshow if you want to have it.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Very good. Yeah, I need it. Thank you. That was, very lovely.
Hi, thank you for the talk. It's been absolutely amazing. I first became familiar with your work at the exhibition at Kells Yard in Cambridge, so quite recently. And it's a 2-part question. One's lighter, one's a bit heavier. But I was sort of wondering, you're very conscious of the space that you're presenting in, you're exhibiting in. So what sort of inclines you more to sort of present in a space, and what about that space will make you maybe not want to present there, if there is any? And the second one is, with Brexit and with what's happening in London and the current climate at the moment, where do you see that sort of push in London, or where do you see London, or rather Britain's place in art, its relationship with art in the near future to come?
Big, broad questions, getting quite late. I think, on the whole, every space, can be the generator of a work, I think, or it's possible. I mean, I think the main thing is, the question that I ask myself is, what how can I activate the space rather than simply occupy it or colonize it or use it as a frame? And how can I activate it in such a way as it isn't simply a perfect fit between object and room? How can it, as it were, implicate the person that walks into that room in an active way? So that thing that I started with a standing stone, and the idea of having to investigate in a way the space-object relation, but in the process, investigating your own, in a way, journey. So I think that there's no such thing as an impossible space. I think that all spaces, inside, outside, built environment, natural environment, they're. I think that process of diagnosis, finding out what will make the space hum or activate it, it's really, really important. It's an important part of the job. Then I think, the second question, well, Brexit is a bloody disaster, isn't it? My father fought in the First World War. My mother's German. He was a pharmaceutical manufacturer. He started being an officer trainer in the Second World War, but in the end, his work for medicine was more important. But what I'm really saying is that both of my parents fought for, in a way, the institutions that would ensure that fascism wouldn't arise again, that there was, as it were, a common desire for a just and peaceful world. I think I started with a few remarks about Boris's take back control and Trump's make America great again. They're both delusional and nostalgic ideas about identity politics and nationhood that just don't work. They're populist and dangerous. So it's just fantastic. Here I am in New York making a show paid for by a bunch of young Korean musicians aged between 19 and 23. I'm about to do a project, well, I hope, a project in the north of France that will be a kind of a dialogue from the information age to the early farmers in Barnenay in northern Brittany. I'm working for a big show in Germany. The whole of my life as an artist has been devoted in a way to making bridges between, exactly as Dione has characterized the ambitions of Connect BTS, to stay, art is an open space. It's all about, in a way, making connections, reinforcing experience in its particularity through making spaces that are open to all comers. So I think I and most of my artist colleagues are doing everything we can to counteract the negative effects of Brexit. Thank you for the question.
Thank you so much.
Antony, you may, but probably won't remember 25 years ago when we had a fleeting relationship at Goldsmiths College.
What are you doing here?
Escaping on the 18th of February back to what I call some element of civilization, but not much. Many artists are standard artists. Mozart, from age 8 to 32 when he died, has music which I can recognize. Henry Moore, for the most part, from very early period to the late period, recognizable. Shakespeare recognizable. Schubert recognizable. Gormley,
but Gormley unrecognizable. No consistency, absolute chaos. I think
total maverick, off the wall at every stage. In 50 years' time, do you think you'll be concerned that nobody will care about this coil of steel? Or the Royal Academy flooded hall? Is it of any concern to you?
I mean, there are parts of me that are tickled by the idea that some of these, what I call industrial fossils that I make, will be, perused by life forms that we can't even imagine. So that idea that sculpture of its nature is about having conversations with times that are yet to happen. That interests me. But on the other hand, I think it interests me less than the idea that it's actually more important to ask questions than to reinforce a style. I think that was one of the, in a way, kind of traps of the 20th century, that somehow stylistic consistency was the absolute be-all and end-all of artistic identity. And
Mozart wasn't in the 20th century.
Sorry?
I don't recall that Mozart was in the 20th century.
That most art was in the 20th?
No, Mozart.
Oh, Mozart.
Oh,
no,
Wolfgang.
No,
Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart.
I know you started with
and
music. But no, okay. But I would like to politely but firmly persist that actually the core subject, which is body in space, is remarkably unilinear in my projects. The fact that it takes different forms that go, as it were, from spatial construction to bodily displacement, I think is just an example of, well, the wonderful freedoms that are offered to an artist of our time. But thank you so much for the question.